Hi and welcome. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about War Trigger: The Third Law, which is a sci-fi miniature skirmish game that is model agnostic and is deterministic. If you've managed to find this video, you probably know what most of those words mean, but let's focus in a little bit on what we mean by deterministic. So in a lot of miniature games, you would be using dice to determine whether or not your models had succeeded when they were perhaps shooting a gun or stabbing an enemy with their alien bone spear. But in War Trigger: The Third Law, instead, we use our deterministic system for comparing different symbols and results. So we use a card like this, and you'll use a dice, kind of whatever dice that you, whatever d6s that you have to hand are perfectly usable. And you're going to pick how many of which different symbol you want to have based on the attributes of the model who's attacking and the model who's defending. So you'll set these out, and I might say, I'm going to have 4 hits or something like that. I'm going to cover it up. My opponent's going to do the same thing, and then we'll reveal and we'll compare the results. So you're balancing between whether you want to go more offensive, more defensive, or maybe trying to do something to try and further your objective that you're trying to complete. And it's the balance between those two things when you're maybe issuing an order to give an action with your model, your opponent's issuing an order to react with their model, and you're kind of working out, I'm going to take a lot of damage, I'm going to put damage out, what am I going to do? But it's all under your control. You're not at the mercy of the dice that you rolled or what you've drawn. It's down to the decisions that you're making in terms of weighing up these different pros and cons. And the same for your opponent, and then you're revealing and seeing what's happening. So that's what we mean when we say deterministic. In terms of model count, it's quite low model count, so like 2 to 12 models is probably the extreme, so somewhere inside that range. And as I said, it's model agnostic. So model agnostic just means you can use whatever models you want, whether those are 3D printed, whether those are models you already have in your existing collection. You just have to pay a bit of attention to what base sizes that they're on. But other than that, you can pretty much use whatever models you feel like represent the faction the best for you, and just get them out onto the tabletop. It takes to play around about 2 hours. It could be a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on various factors. But once you're familiar with the rules and you get going, it's about 2 hours to play. And during that time, you're going to go through 3 acts, which are what control the scenarios. We've got Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 in the scenario deck, which gives you, there's 10 cards in each, which means you've got about 1,000 different scenarios you can encounter. Plus you have weather cards. So there's about 10 weather cards that will, again, lay different weather conditions over the whole of the game, which kind of change the way that it plays. So what do you need to be able to play? So you're going to need the core rulebook, which is just this kind of little brief run through of all of the core rules, some examples, some special rules, how it all kind of interacts and works, tells you how to set up a game, how to build your force. You're going to need the core deck, which has those scenario cards in, the weather cards, your cards for doing your deterministic combat resolution. You're going to need a faction deck for each player, which has all of the stat cards for all of the different models that you're going to be fielding, as well as your order deck for all the orders you're going to be able to issue out to those models. Outside of this, there's some other bits and pieces that you're going to need to be able to play. So you're going to need some terrain that you can put out onto your battlefield. You're going to need the battlefield itself. It's typically a 3 by 3 foot area, and maybe on a nice map like this is great. You're also going to need some tools for measuring, so you could use like a tape measure or one of these widgets, or a little combination of the both. Anything like that you've probably got if you're playing miniature war games. You're going to need some objective markers. So you're going to need some 40mm objective markers for placing your main objectives, and some 30mm objective markers just for things that get picked up and carried around, which comes up in some of the act cards that we were just talking about. You're going to need some tokens to represent damage, so the wounds that your models are taking. So any tokens you can really use for this, just so you can put them out on the battlefield next to a model to show that it's taken some wounds. And you're going to need some dice. So like I said, any D6 will do. You'll need a handful of these for each player to be able to mark out the different symbols that you are picking. So that's really, at a really high level, that's an overview of what War Trigger: The Third Law is all about. Please have a look around the site. We've got a bunch of videos which go into a lot more detail about what all of these cards do. We've got battle reports, so you can see how some different factions play, and we've also got information that kind of talks a lot more about those individual factions as well. So if you're interested in picking the game up, once you've had a bit of an explore around, there's links below as well for where you can purchase the game online. Thank you very much.